A dense layer of fog that inhibits all sight? Check. A plethora of scouts all primed and ready to scream? Check. A high-intensity thunderdome that can easily end people's runs? Yep, check. A reactor sequence that does something no other reactor has ever done? Check. A dicey extraction that surprises players right when they think they're finally in the clear? Check. And finally, a level guide that'll assist people in surviving every single one of these challenges as well as the unmentioned? Check. Hello everyone, Professor Scaly here, and welcome to the alternate R5C2 level guide. As always, we're starting off with your loadout, and today that is going to comprise of a biotracker, a mine deployer, and 2 burst sentries. Reason why I recommend the biotracker is that there is a fair amount of dense fog in this level that will be problematic here and there. There are going to be a few zones that are not very well lit or completely covered in pitch black darkness, and there are also going to be a fair amount of shadow type enemies during one portion of the level. As for the mine deployer, we're going to be utilizing this a fair amount during the entirety of the level. Plenty of alarms where we'll have doors that we could shut, mine, and maybe even seafoam with the use of some seafoam grenades, as there are a fair amount of them in this level. There are also going to be a few blood doors, and of course mines help out tremendously for them. And since there are a large amount of scouts in this level, if we find ourselves in a situation where we accidentally wake up 1 or even 2 of them at the same time, we could always just fall back to door, shut it, mine it, and let that do most of the work for us. As for the sentries, I'm recommending burst sentries as there's a lot of different situations you'll find yourself in when it comes to this level, and since burst sentries are pretty much good in any type of situation you could find yourself in, I find that they are the best for this level. They're going to help out a lot when it comes to the overload objective, as we're going to have to deal with waves upon waves of enemies while we're dealing with a full zone alarm. They're going to help out tremendously for the secondary objective, as we will have to do a reactor sequence, and sentries are great for defending against reactor waves. And they'll even help out for the main objective portions where we have to deal with a few alarm doors, including even some surge alarms, which again is sort of why I recommend burst sentries, as we want sentries that are good at killing enemies with a decent rate of fire. Dropping down into the level, you'll see that your main objective is to find the generator cluster inside zone 212 and bring 5 power cells to it. And these power cells will be located in quite a few different zones throughout the main objective sector. Now, when it comes to you and your teammates, you'll be starting off inside zone 211, and immediately upon hitting the floor, you'll see that there's a dense layer of fog. Now, thankfully though, every single time you plug a power cell into a generator in that cluster, it will cause the fog to lower by a fair amount. So whenever you find a power cell, feel free to plug it into the generator cluster so it's a little bit easier to see where you're going in some of these areas. Aside from this though, there will be 1 scout patrolling about inside zone 211 along with some regular strikers and shooters, and of course more resources to collect. And you'll also be able to find the very first bulkhead key, as well as the bulkhead door control and door to the secondary objective. However, we're not going to be plugging our key into this quite yet. Instead, once we take care of everything into 11, we're going to go to the eastern side to the blood door to zone 218. Since it's a blood door, we place 1 mine on the door, open it up, and then once the door opens and the enemy screams and the entirety of the first room has been alerted, we're then going to fall back to the west to that big door behind us and shut it and place a mine on it to just conserve a little bit of our ammunition. Then once it goes, you just shoot and kill anything that's still left alive, and then with everything dead, you go into zone 218 itself, which almost the entirety of the zone at this point in the level will be covered by that dense layer of fog. But with the first room pulled, you can very easily go throughout here without worrying about bumping into an enemy, and in the southeast corner, you'll be able to find a terminal. Use this terminal to ping the power cell that is inside this zone. If it's in the first room, you grab it easily. If it's in the second room, might have to send 1 person who will sneak through the enemies in there, and once you get the power cell, you can leave, because there are no resources inside this zone to collect, and the only other thing to really take note of is the bulkhead door control and door to your overload objectives, which we will come back here just a little bit later. But with the power cell in hand, go back into zone 211, go to the western side to the security door to zone 212. This is just simply going to be a full team scan, so finish a scan and head on inside. And in here, you'll be able to find more enemies, more resources, another scout patrolling about, the bulkhead door control, and the door to your main objective. But more importantly, in the middle of the first room, you'll be able to find that generator cluster. So take that power cell over to it, plug it in, and that will lower the fog a bit, and you can more easily go throughout the rest of the zoning. Now, once you've taken care of everything inside of the zone, you'll see that there's a security door to the north and to the south, specifically to zone 213 and 214. Both of these security doors are going to have class 4 sustained alarms tied to them, and there's a power cell in each of these areas. So ideally, we're going to want to open up both of them. So starting off, let's take care of that northern security door to zone 213. As you can see with this map overlay, we're going to be leaving quite a few different doors open. The 2 southern doors we're leaving open as we want to preserve them for that next alarm door, and the one right here we're leaving open to try to funnel in the enemies through here. Then we could just have our sentries out in the previous room facing down towards the south and call it good. But a thing to keep note of is that this funnel strategy does not always work perfectly. Enemies do have to walk by that closed door to actually get to us if they spawn from the east, and when they walk near that door, there is a chance that they'll get just a tiny bit too close to it, which will cause them to lock onto the door, and then they'll break it down, and at that point the funnel will no longer work. This will not happen all the time, but every so often it can occur, so just be aware of that. Once you finish this alarm though, before you open up that door, head into the southern area and deal with the class 4 sustained alarm tied to the security door to zone 214. As you can see with this map overlay, it's pretty much just the same thing. We're going to leave both of the northern doors open because we actually want to preserve these for the generator cluster alarm itself later on in the level. The western door to our room we're leaving open to funnel enemies in through there, and the eastern door we are going to leave shut. Same thing as before, this funnel strategy sometimes will not always work, but I find that more often than not it actually will because enemies do not get quite as close to that closed door as they do for the other alarm. But once you have taken care of both of these alarms, you can then either all 4 go into the same zone as a team, or you can split up into 2 teams of 2. As for these 2 side zones, they are very similar to each other. They are covered in pitch black darkness. The only type of enemies you're going to see in these, I believe, will be giant strikers and maybe even some giant shooters. There will be a single 3-use ammo pack in both of the zones, 1 power cell each, which once you get them, you can plug them into the generator cluster. And in the northern zone, you'll be able to find a fair amount of explosive trip mines, while in the southern zone, you'll be able to find a decent amount of seafoam grenades. Which, seeing how you have a mine deployer on the team, you don't really need those explosive trip mines, but those seafoam grenades can help out quite a bit throughout multiple parts of this level. So I would recommend that at least 2, 3, or maybe even all 4 people on the team go on ahead and grab those seafoam grenades before you go further into the level. But at this point, once you plug in those 3 power cells, you are 3/5 of the way done with your main objective, and there's nothing else we can really do until we actually plug a bulkhead key into a door control. So if you and your teammates are doing a main objective only run, feel free to jump to the timestamp that you see on screen. There we will continue talking about zone 215 and how to get the last 2 power cells. Everybody else though, we're going to be heading back into zone 218, clearing out the last few enemies if we haven't already, and then plugging our bulkhead key into the door control for the overload objective and getting started on that. The overload bulkhead door to zone 480 just simply opens up, no scan or anything tied to it, so once you're ready, you can head right on in there. And upon entering into the sector, you'll see that your overload objective is to find a specific terminal and put a command into it. And that terminal is actually located in the middle of the room you are currently in. But before you go running over to it and put that command in, you're going to want to set up some defenses. Because if you look around a bit, you'll notice that there's a security door to the north, east, and the south, all 3 of these being under lockdown. And there's a lot of resources inside the zone as well. So if you played alternate R5B3 secondary objective, this should look pretty familiar to you. Once you put that command into the terminal, it initiates a full team scan. Once you finish a full team scan, it will then initiate a 5-minute full zone alarm, and those 3 security doors are going to open up, and waves of enemies are going to be spawning in. So what I recommend you do first is go throughout the room, grab all the resources, and supply yourself as best as you can. Heal people up as much as possible, make sure everybody's ammunition is looking good, fill up both of those sentries, and then hold on to any excess ammo packs and med packs, that way you can utilize them halfway through the scan when you're going to need to. As for setting up your tools, I'm going to suggest you have one of your sentries facing over towards the eastern security door, and then the second sentry could be facing any of the other 3. Doesn't really matter which one for this one, it's just important to have one facing towards the east because ideally your team is going to be defending in the middle of the room. And from this position, you can pretty easily see the northern, western, and southern security door. None of those pillars in the room are really blocking your line of sight. However, that eastern security door is quite well hidden, so having a sentry over there will give you a second audio cue to alert you that enemies are coming from that direction. If you don't hear the wave spawning in, then you should at least hear the sentry activating and shooting at enemies, which will very quickly let you know you need to be looking over to the east and deal with whatever is coming from that direction. As for your mines, you're not going to be mining the northern, eastern, or southern security doors whatsoever, but you can go back out into zone 218 and go over to the 2 doors in there, shut them, and place a mine on each of them, as any wave that spawns from the west will have to spawn behind one of those 2 doors. Don't bother seafoaming them though, because the amount of enemies per wave is not that much, so seafoaming those doors would be complete overkill. Once you have the sentries and the mines positioned though, and your team is good to go, put the command to the terminal, do the full team scan, and get ready to defend. Now, when it comes to this full zone alarm, there'll be a few different types of enemies that could possibly spawn in. Either you'll get around 4 or 5 regular chargers in a wave, you'll get 1 or 2 giant strikers in a wave, 1 or 2 giant chargers in a wave, or 1 or 2 hybrids in a wave, which the giant chargers and the hybrids are probably the most dangerous of them all, but even then, you don't want to just sort of brush aside the regular giant strikers or the pack of chargers, as they could pretty easily do some good damage to you if you aren't keeping an eye out for them. Very important that the biotracker is keeping their head on a swivel and tagging enemies, and also that everyone on the team is listening for when those waves spawn in, because that audio cue will tell you which direction they came from. One other thing though about this full zone alarm is that there are a few special type of enemies, namely some Snatchers, a tank, and a birther that will spawn in. There are 3 Snatchers in total you're going to have to deal with during this alarm. The first one spawning in around the 10% mark of the scan, the second one spawning in around the 70% mark, and the third one spawning in around the 100% mark, so right at the end. Of course, if you got bioscan speed boosters or something goes down during the scan and you're not constantly getting progress, these numbers will vary just a little bit, because it's set time intervals, not necessarily set percentage intervals. As for the one and only tank, he'll spawn in around the 40% mark of the scan, and the one and only birther will spawn in right at the end at the 100% mark, which is pretty troll because not only is that birther spawning in, but so is a Snatcher. Which my recommendation for dealing with this entire thing is, again, stay in the middle of the room, keep your head on a swivel, and when those Snatchers do spawn in, get rid of them quickly, because if they grab anybody, not only will your scan stop game progress, but also they could potentially get dropped off next to the next wave of enemies, and getting dropped off right next to a giant charger isn't really all that appeasing. As for the tank, once he spawns in and you see him get into the room, rush him down. Kill him as quickly as you can, but if you're fighting him and you hear another wave spawn in, have 1 or 2 people on the team break away from the tank fight and deal with those enemies that just spawned in while the other people continue to focus down that tank. As for that final birther and Snatcher, I would recommend take advantage of all the pillars in the room to break line of sight to pretty much every single one of the security doors, and use the biotracker to figure out where the Snatcher is and where the birther is. Snatcher is going to be rushing you down first, so get rid of him before he has a chance to grab any of you, and then once he is dead and the birther is the only thing left alive, just make your way over to the birther by using the pillars to block line of sight, and once you get close enough to it, either just simply mag dump her and her babies to get rid of them, or if you happen to have a C-foam grenade, use it to freeze her in place and very easily deal with her. Once every single one of the enemies are dead though and the scan hits 100%, your overall objective is completed. All that's left to do now is just head into the 3 side zones that opened up. There'll be no resources in any of them, but there will be a fair amount of artifacts, and your second bulkhead key will be located inside zone 482, which I believe is the eastern door. Then once you have all that, you can head back out into the main area over to zone 211, and then go to the secondary bulkhead door control and plug your key in there, which will then unlock the security door to zone 396. Again, this bulkhead door is just going to be an open door, no scan or anything tied to it, so open it up and head inside. And upon entering into zone 396, you'll see that your secondary objective is to find the reactor and make sure it's fully up and operational before you leave. And that reactor terminal will always be located inside zone 397. As for 396 itself, not really anything special, just a few enemies and I think a few resources, and that's about it. At the back end of it, you'll find the security door to 397, which is just going to be a full team scan. And inside of zone 397, not only will you be able to find that reactor terminal and a lot of resources, but also a fair amount of giant strikers and giant shooters, I think maybe even some hybrids, as well as a single scout patrolling about. So do your best to clear through this without wasting too many resources. But once you clear out the entirety of the room and you know where all your resources are and you've supplied best that you can, it is then time to go to the reactor terminal, put the startup command into it, and get this show on the road. Now, when it comes to this reactor sequence, you're going to have to deal with a total of 6 different waves, and the only code that is given to you for free is the very first one. As for the type of enemies you're going to have to deal with, Wave 1 is only going to consist of regular strikers and shooters. Wave 2 is going to consist of strikers and shooters as well as some hybrids. And then Wave 3 does something a little bit weird. I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be just like Wave 2 where it's only regulars and hybrids. However, ever since Ultimate Rundown 6, I think something dirked out with this level because now you actually get regular Shadow Strikers. I've heard supposedly you also still can sometimes get hybrids, but in the one run of this level I've done after the update, I only got regular Strikers, Shooters, and Shadow Strikers. So depending on when you play this, it might be a little bit different. Who knows? I would just say be prepared for all 4 possible options. The fourth wave though, thankfully things stop derping out a bit and we go back to regular strikers, shooters, hybrids, as well as some regular chargers. Then wave 5 is similar to wave 4, although the chargers are going to vanish, so no longer have to deal with them. And then wave 6 is a little bit of a special one, because in addition to all the enemies from before, you're going to have to deal with a single birther at the end of the wave. Which, yeah, that can catch people off guard quite easily. But I've got a pretty easy way to deal with her, although we'll talk about that later when we actually get to the 6th wave. As for defending during this reactor, I typically just defend in zone 396. I either hug the left side of the room or the right side. I'll place down one or both of my sentries and just hold out there in that nice little funnel spot. This area works out quite nicely, although something you need to be aware of is that once you get to the 3rd wave, enemies can possibly spawn from behind you, in which case what I like to do is just simply have one of my sentries facing in towards the reactor room itself, and then I'll have one person on my team who I've dedicated to keep an eye out more so for behind, less so in front of us. Of course, they can still help shooting at enemies that do approach from the south, but they should be keeping an eye out on the reactor room in case a wave spawns from there. If one does, then the entire team can shift their focus, or at least just some people on the team. That way, no matter what, you're never getting snuck up on. When it comes to the 6th and final wave though, because of that birther, we are going to be defending somewhere else, although once again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Which, now that you know what type of enemies to deal with and where you're defending, let's talk about every single one of the zones one by one and where you're going to have to go to get each of these codes. So, as I mentioned, once you have dealt with the first wave of enemies, your code will be given to you for free. Then once you have dealt with the second wave of enemies, the security door to the northern end of the reactor, the one to zone 398, is going to unlock. This security door is going to have a solo stealth scan tied to it, just like pretty much every single one of the security doors along the way. So one person can run over, activate it, do the scan, and then open it up. Inside zone 398, there are going to be enemies, there'll be resources, nothing too terribly special. And as you can see with the map here, there are 2 different possible spawn locations for your terminal. Or rather, I guess I should say, 2 different terminals, one of which is going to have your code. So I'll typically run into the eastern one and check that one first, and if it's not that, I know to go check the other one real quick. And then I'll use whatever leftover time I have to clear out all the enemies of the zone and grab whatever resources I can use. Then once you're done with that, head back to defend and you move on to the 3rd wave. Once you have finished dealing with the 3rd wave of enemies, the security door to zone 399 is then going to unlock, which is found at the eastern side of 398. So head back up there, go to that security door, again, solo stealth scan tied to it, and inside of zone 399, there's going to be more enemies for you to deal with, more resources to collect, and as you can see with the map, there are 3 different terminals, 2 of which are in the same room, the 3rd one just being that southern one. So again, I'll typically just go check out the 2 northern terminals, and if it's not that one, I'll make my way down south, and then again, use my time to clear out more enemies and grab resources. There's also a security door to the far eastern side, which has a class 4 alarm, which you do have access to it right now. And you might see some people go ahead and deal with this at the current moment, but if you're an average group, I would actually say wait until the next wave. Once you're done dealing with the 4th wave of enemies, that security door is where you have to go to next, zone 400. And as you can see with this map overlay, there's only one possible spawn location for enemies during this alarm, although it will be charger type enemies, so be aware of that. And they're going to go through this door right here to get into your room. So shut that door, mine it, maybe even hit it with a C-foam grenade if you have one, and then you can place the sentries in the room somewhere in that corridor area facing towards the door, sort of like you could see in the background footage. As for zone 400 is just one big donut-shaped room. In here, there are going to be a few regular chargers, as well as a single charger scout patrolling about, although you don't really need to worry about them all that much, as long as they don't spawn too close to the entrance of the room. Because as you can see with the map overlay, all 3 of your terminals are actually pretty close in. One of them is literally just on the other side of the glass, right next to you as you come into the room. So check that terminal first. If it's not the correct one, head down south, check those, and if you want to, you could just simply get the code and leave. Of course, you're given a lot of time though, so if you want to clear out the enemies in here, grab some resources, by all means, go on ahead. Either way though, once you have this code, you head back, you then deal with the next wave, and once you're done with the 5th wave, you're going to be heading somewhere a bit different. Because now you're going to be heading over to the eastern side of the reactor room where the security door to zone 402 is located at. And inside of this room will be a sleeping tank as well as a few giant chargers, usually about 2 or 3 of them I think, and these guys will automatically wake up fairly shortly after you open up that security door. So if there's a giant charger near the entrance, I will just blast my way through it very quickly just to get it out of there. If not though, I'll just wait for the enemies to wake up and let them rush me down. The reactor room is a pretty good spot to actually fight these enemies in, as you can get cover from the tank and focus on the giant chargers first, and once they're dead, you could then focus down that tank. Once all of them are dead though, you're going to head into that room, and in here, you're not going to be looking for a terminal, but rather you're going to be looking for a colored key card. because in here there will be resources to collect. There'll actually be your third bulkhead key, although you don't have to grab this yet, and a color key card which you need in order to access the security door to zone 401, where the terminal for your 5th code is actually located at. So once you have that color key card, go back into the reactor room, go to the western side to that security door to 401. This door is going to be a blood door, so place a mine on it, then plug the key card in, open it up, and fall back. Let all the enemies come to you. The first room of the zone is fairly big, so there might be a lot of enemies in there you're going to have to deal with. And the slightly annoying thing about zone 401 is that not only can it have a lot of enemies in it, but it's covered in pitch black darkness. Thankfully though, there are only 2 terminals in this zone. As you can see with the map, there's one up north, which is the one I would typically check for first as it's pretty close to the entrance. And then if it's not that one, I know I have to head down south and go for that terminal instead. Then once I have the code, just again, use any leftover time to grab resources if you need them. And then once you put that code in and you initiate the 6th wave, you're not going to be going back to the usual spot to defend, but rather you're going to go back into zone 402, just like you can see in the background footage. The reason for this is because we're going to have to head east of here into zone 403 to get the 6th and final code, so we're closer to where we have to head to anyway. We once again have a nice one-way funnel, as enemies can only come from in front of us where the open security door is, and we also have these glass panes in the room we can hide behind, which is really nice because not only does it give us good cover against the hybrids, but it makes it so that when we get closer to the end of that wave and the birther spawns in, we can have some people either just hide behind the glass, or you can rush down below onto the staircase and hide behind the wall a little bit so the birther does not have line of sight of you until it comes into the room. Then when it does come into the room, it's much closer to you, so if somebody has a C-foam grenade, you could quickly just peek the corner, hit her with it to prevent her from birthing, and then just very quickly deal with her. Once everything from this reactor wave has been dealt with though, you can then head over to the eastern side where you'll find the security door to zone 403. This door is once again going to have a solo stealth scan tied to it, and inside of the zone there's going to be a fair amount of regular strikers, shooters, some giant strikers, and 2 charger scouts patrolling about. And as you can see with this map, both of the terminals are located in the far eastern room. So I'll typically clear out the first room. I will usually just go guns crazy unless both of the charger scouts are in the same room, in which case I will try to sneak by if I can. Then I'll go to the southeastern area, shut the door behind me once I get in there, blast my way through that room if need be, then go to the eastern room, check the 2 terminals, and relay it to my teammates who will just be waiting by the reactor terminal, or at least one person will be, and they'll just put that code in once we have it. Once you've done that, the reactor sequence has been completed, no more waves of enemies will spawn in, and at this point you can now take all the time in the world you want to just go through every single one of these zones you went through during the reactor sequence and grab any resources you left behind. Then once you and your teammates have fully resupplied all the way up that you want to, and you got that 3rd and final bulkhead key, you can then head back into the main objective sector, go into zone 212 where the main bulkhead door control is, plug your key into it, do the scan, and that will unlock the security door to zone 215. And at this point, we could continue on with the rest of the main objective. Alrighty, so continue on with the rest of the main objective. We just went into zone 215, and in here there will be a power cell for us to collect, a fair amount of regular strikers shooters. There's going to be a total of 5 scouts patrolling about, which are quite dangerous because a lot of the doors in the zone are useful for upcoming alarms, and you'll be able to find more resources as well as some disinfectant packs. Which, even though there's no infectious fog on this level or spitters you could gain infection from, there are a ton of syringes, and if you're like me, you've probably taken a fair amount of those health ones to just heal up a bit. So yeah, if you or your team is having an infection, feel free to look for those disinfectant packs and disinfect. But as you make your way through the zone, clearing out room by room, like I said, you'll be able to find that power cell, which once you do, somebody can take it back and plug it into the generator cluster, which will put you at 4 out of 5, and all that's left to do is collect 1 more. Now inside the zone, there are going to be 3 more security doors, although one of them we cannot access quite yet, specifically the security door to zone 219 found at the far southwestern corner of it. This door will unlock once we finish the generator cluster. The other 2 security doors though, the ones to zone 216 up to the north and the one to 217 down to the south, these are accessible at the current moment. However, both of these security doors have alarms tied to them. The one to 216 is going to have a class 5 mixed alarm that will spawn in only shadow type enemies, and the one to zone 217 is going to have a class 6 mixed alarm that also will only spawn in shadow type enemies. Now as for which zone you're going to want to head into, this sort of depends on what type of run you're doing. If you're doing a prisoner efficiency run and therefore only need 1 more power cell, I would say go north into 216. Reason for it is because it's an easier alarm to deal with, and there's only 1 power cell inside of that zone. However, if you're doing a main objective only run, there is something else you could actually do, which is go into zone 217 because even though it is a slightly more difficult alarm, there are more resources in there as well as 2 total power cells, which some of you might be thinking, what's the point going in there if you only need 1 more? Well, remember that blood door way earlier in the level that we opened up that had no resources in it but a single power cell? Well, if you want to, you can completely skip that door. Or if you really want to, you could skip one of the class 4 sustain alarms from earlier, and instead of going into one of them, you can go into here and just get the 2 power cells from there. So if you want to go into that slightly more difficult zone to get 2 power cells, feel free to skip one of the ones from earlier, whether it's the blood door or one of the 2 class 4 sustain alarm ones, in which case I would say skip the northern one with the explosive trip mines, as getting the seafoam products from the southern zone would be more beneficial. Either way though, enough about that, let's actually show some map overlays for these 2 alarms. So if you're going north into zone 216, your map overlay looks like this. 3 different locations enemies could possibly spawn from, and a few different doors we could tinker with. So you notice that the 2 western doors I have labeled you should leave open. Reason for this is we want to preserve these for that security door down to the southwest is zone 219, because that security door is a surge alarm, which is going to be a whole lot more difficult to deal with than this one, especially with how close those enemies can spawn. As for the other doors in the zone, you're going to be shutting every single one of them just to simply buy you some time if enemies do try to go through them. And the door right here that leads directly into your room, go on ahead and mine this one as well as hit it with a seafoam grenade. And then your sentries, you gotta have both to the west or one to the west and one to the east, up to you and your teammates. As for the alarm door down south to zone 217, your map overlay is going to look like this. Pretty similar, it's really just the reverse image, although enemies can now actually spawn in that middle room as well. But just like before, we're leaving both of the western doors open, we're going to be shutting every single other door in this area and mining this one right here that leads directly into your room, as well as the seafoam grenade thing, and of course, your sentries are the same logic. Once you have finished dealing with every single one of the scans and all the shadows are dead, you can pack up your sentries and then head into whichever one of the 2 zones you just unlocked. Both of them are pretty similar to each other. They are going to be covering pitch black darkness. There's going to be a power cell or 2 power cells in them. And the only type of enemies you can expect to see would be shadow type enemies. So shadow strikers, shadow giants, as well as 1 shadow scout. So go throughout here, you can either sneak past the enemies or just blast your way through or melee, whatever your teammates want to do. And once you get the power cells and the resources, you can then just leave and go back to the generator cluster room. Now, when you get back here, before you plug in that 5th and final power cell, you're actually going to want to set up a few defenses, because this generator cluster is going to have a class 4 alarm tied to it, and as you can see with the map overlay, there are a few different locations enemies could possibly spawn from. As for how you're going to want to deal with it, I recommend every single door I have highlighted, go on ahead and shut them, and if you do have enough mines to mine every single one of them and still have a few leftover mines, go on ahead and do it. As for your sentries, I would recommend either do not place them down at all or place them down towards the western side of the zone. The reason for it is because something I like to do, since we're about to deal with an upcoming surge alarm, is once we finish all 4 sets of scans, I don't care if there's enemies still left alive, I will just immediately run over to the west, grab both of the sentries and take them with me, and make my way to the security door to zone 219. Then I will shut any of the doors behind me that I'm able to, and then when I get closer to it, I will very quickly set up for that surge alarm and pull it so that not every single enemy is going to be right on my doorstep right off the get-go. If you want to do it that way, by all means go on ahead. It's not necessary. You could also just clear out every single one of the enemies and then pack up your sentry and mines and then go do the surge alarm, but I think this trick can make it a little bit easier if your team is comfortable with trying it out. Either way though, once you plug in all 5 power cells and you deal with that alarm, your main objective is completed, and all that's left to do is make your way to zone 220 where your extraction scan will be waiting for you. But along the way, we're going to have to deal with 2 more security doors. The first one being zone 219, which like I said, is going to have a class 3 surge alarm tied to it. And as you can see with the map overlay, there are 2 different locations enemies could possibly spawn from, and these 2 doors are the only ones we can utilize. I'll typically set these doors up in advance while I have maybe the northern one shut, mined, and seafoamed, and then I'll leave the southern one open so when my teammates and I rush through here with that wave of enemies behind us, we can then shut that door, mine it, and seafoam it, and then we place our sentries in the room with us facing towards that open room divider, and then we just activate the alarm immediately. Then we just have to do our best to survive during these scans and not get overwhelmed by the enemies. They will be spawning pretty close to you, but those mine and seafoam doors will help out quite a bit. Once you finish every single one of the scans though, deal with any of the enemies that are still left alive, and once they're all dead, pack up your sentries, and if you want to, person with the mine deployer, you can go back and pick up any mines that did not explode, and if you want to, you can also grab some more seafoam grenades if you don't have any on hand, because you're going to want 1, maybe 2 more for the rest of this level. Once you're good to go though, you can then head into zone 219. In here, it's going to be a lot of giant strikers as well as hybrids sleeping in the area, so make your way through, trying your best to melee as many of them as you can. And at the far back end of it, you'll find a security door to zone 220. This security door though will have a class 4 surge alarm tied to it, and as you can see with this map overlay, there's only one possible spawn location for enemies and only one door that you can utilize. So shut that door, mine it, and C-foam it, and if you want to, you can have both of your sentries facing towards that door, maybe a little bit towards the southeast so it's shooting at enemies as they're approaching it, or you could place the sentries in the room with you on the bridges in the middle portion, as enemies will have to go through one of the two bridges to actually get to you and your teammates. Once you are good to go though, activate the alarm, get to work on every single one of the scans, and assuming you're able to survive, you can then deal with any of the enemies still left alive, pack up your sentries, and then open up the security door to zone 220. Now, as for zone 220 itself, it's a little bit spicy. It's not just a simple extraction. The extraction scan itself is a silent one, no alarm will initiate, but in this room will be 2 scouts as well as a birther sleeping smack dab in the middle of the room, which can be a little bit terrifying until you realize that this actually isn't really all that threatening, because even if those scouts alert, the wave of enemies is going to be spawning pretty far away from you, so far away that I actually do believe you can finish that scan with all 4 people in it before a single thing shows up, which means the birther is really the only immediate threat. And if you have a C-foam grenade, you can easily just C-foam her, run in and alert the scouts, and get on that scan. So despite this extraction looking pretty terrifying, it's actually really not all that bad. Either way though, once you get on that scan and you get it all the way to 100%, you are done and you have completed alternate R5C2. And that's all there is to it. Alternate R5C2 is one heck of a level. Despite it being really lengthy, I enjoy almost every single second of it. The overload objective is an amazing Thunderdome survival fight, which perfected all the issues I had with the first iteration back in R5B3. The secondary is an enjoyable reactor objective that pulls a fast one on players by sneaking a birther into the final wave, which caught me off guard quite heavily the first time I played it. And even though the main objective is a simple generator cluster, the numerous amounts of scouts, the surge alarms, and that spicy extraction right at the end ensure that this is a level I'll never forget, and for good reasons too. As always though, thank you for watching this video all the way to the very end. I do hope that I was able to provide you with some assistance in beating this level. If you have any tips or tricks for this level that you want to share, any questions for me, or you just have something in general that you would like to say, please do let me know down in the comments. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and if you want to join my lovely community, there's a link to my Discord down in the description, as well as some other links you might be interested in. Among those links being one to the official GTFO merch store, which, as always, I highly recommend you check out if you're a fellow GTFO enthusiast and you're looking to pick up some sweet merch. Until next time, for many of us, the summer season is just about over, which means it's time to put away the barbecues, bring out the jackets, and enjoy the trees as they change colors and the leaves fall one by one. And hopefully, I'll see all you wonderful people in the next video.